What's going on? I'm Skyler from CultureShockShop.com, owner of Culture Shock Clothing and Records, and welcome to our Vinyl Happy Hour video series, where we like to discuss our weekly new releases, special limited versions of records, and some indie store exclusives. While enjoying a little bit of whiskey, I've got some Uncle Nearest tonight. So, one of the things I want to mention is that all of the records I'm discussing are available at the link below, or if you go to like our staff picks at CultureShockShop.com. But as you know, many of these are limited releases, so if you go there and find them not available, that's probably because they're sold out. So don't wait long on some of these if you're interested in them. I'm going to talk first off about some of the indie store exclusives, which are only available to independent record stores. I just brought out my classic Gary Numan, the Pleasure Principle, 1979 release. He was always a fashionista, as you can tell, but he has a brand new album. 40-something years later, the man is still making music, and his new album, Intruder, is an excellent album. And I actually almost forgot, because I had ordered this quite a while back for the store, if it was an indie store exclusive or not. It just said, you know, exclusive limited edition red double vinyl. It is an indie store exclusive. So that's why I wanted to feature that. Double LP, great length of music, no filler on this, super great sounding quality too. Gary Numan is one of those people who's kind of slipped through the cracks for me, and I hadn't listened to him for quite a long time, and I usually associated him with his 70s and 80s kind of more goth, electro, new wave stuff or whatever. But he is sounding great. Some of these albums that he's put out these last few years, I had heard from some friends and customers what his live show was like too. It's amazing. On this new album, he's definitely taking us through, there's a lot of detail too, talking about like almost like end of the world times, and talking about all of the issues and problems going on with the earth itself, with the climate and other things like that, and of course with people as well. So there's really interesting lyrics to it, but the music is so good. It's so sharp, so electronic. I mean, I definitely, the first thing I picked up on was like a Nine Inch Nails sound, and I couldn't get over how great the electronic sounded. The recording also super spotless, super quiet. I always drop the needle, give a listen to these first. They're not even streaming yet, so that's the way I have to check out some of this music, because it is getting released this week. So that was a really great listen. And not just this album, but I'd say his last 3 albums. You know, if you haven't checked them out yet, go back and check them out. They are so good sounding. They did a great job. It's a BMG release. Great job on the sound quality too. I always love to hear how loud and how clear these can sound, especially the bass is where it really comes to life. But yeah, just wanted to show that off a little bit. Check that out. There is another indie store exclusive from some classic artists. This is the Violent Femmes. Add it up. This is the singles 1981 to 1993. And this is an indie store exclusive compilation. Wisconsin band, Milwaukee band more specifically. Lauren, you saw them with me, right? Weren't they at Riot Fest? Great live show. So what's really cool is the first 3 sides are, you know, different. Of course, you've got Blister in the Sun and Waiting for the Bus and Gone Daddy Gone. But there is a 4th side of some live tracks. These guys live are just sensational too. But let's show off the vinyl. It is a teal colored indie store exclusive vinyl. Also great sounding. I got a chance to listen to this, and just sounded so good. I will tell you, be careful with new records, because there was a little bit of a piece of like plastic that didn't get sheared all the way out from the center spike, so I had to kind of twist that out. It wouldn't fit quite on the spindle. So when you get those little flakes, or those little plastic flakes from the vinyl, I had to carefully make sure I brushed them off and got the static off so it didn't hurt the vinyl. That's kind of a common thing. I've had that happen with a couple of records. So it's a funny thing I mentioned too, because I've had people say records are warped or didn't fit on the spindle at all. It was wobbling. It's because that spindle hole needed to be rounded out. So that happened to me today, even with this one. So they do give you a little sticker so you know right off the bat. Indie retail exclusive teal vinyl, Craft Records. They've been doing some really great analog stuff, great sounding releases from all types of music. So we are going to go into all types of music today too for Vinyl Happy Hour, because I want to talk about some jazz. This is Doug Carn Revelation. Not only is this a very important historical record, but it is an indie store exclusive. They only did 500 copies of this. This is a Real Gone music series. But look at the color of this vinyl. They said on the sticker, what does it say? Orange and black swirl pressing, limited to 500 copies. This was a 1973 release on the Black Jazz label. I don't know if I've seen a record quite this color. It's very cool, kind of almost like this marbled wood swirl. You know, a little a little honey kind of looking. Anyway, this is Doug Carn, who put out several albums on the Black Jazz label, and his wife doing the vocals, Jean Carn. This was a very pro-black movement record label, really focused on young jazz musicians coming out of that kind of, you know, it's a revelation. It's a time of change. You know, there was an uprising going on. At the time, you know, there's definitely a lot of, especially white protesters and stuff, protesting the war in Vietnam and stuff like that. But there was a lot of black people protesting, you know, during the Black Panther movement and stuff like that, and really trying to get a voice for black rights and stuff like that. And the Black Jazz label really focused on kind of propelling and giving a chance for the voices and the musicians of that kind of era to get heard and do something a little different that wasn't totally just a mainstream thing, but music with a message, and that's what they did. And they only had a few dozen releases, I believe. And also what's kind of strange is they were based out of Oakland. You don't really hear about a lot of labels coming out of, you know, your cities that aren't just LA, Chicago, and New York. But they had some definitely interesting releases. However, it wasn't widely distributed probably. So it's really cool to see Real Gone going back and finding some of these smaller labels. You can see that the linked hands there, the black hands linked together for the Black Jazz label. Originals of this are pretty scarce and usually pretty pricey or beat up if you can find them even. So I'd love to see like labels putting out reissues of stuff from huge labels and small independent artists like this as well. This is the Indie Store exclusive. There are also black vinyl copies of this. Definitely a mixture of not just your jazz. So Doug, he actually plays organ, piano on that, stuff like that. And what's also really cool is the insert that came with this. They actually had a recent interview with him. And he was talking about, you know, some of the music that he grew up on and some of the people he wanted to cover and give like a new voice to and actually add some vocals to with his wife. So it's really cool to see him talking about some of the gigs that he played, musicians that he, you know, wanted to honor with doing some different covers of their songs. But he plays piano, organ, although he could also play horn too on some other albums he did. Great list of musicians who are not as well known as, of course, like, you know, the Blue Note record people and some of those. So really cool to check that out and see some kind of smaller artists getting the limelight for these like highlighted releases. Here's another new release from an older classic. The Counting Crows have some new music out. So this is where I'm going to get into a couple of, let's say, pandemic related things, because Counting Crows made some new music during the pandemic. And I really like how they did this release, because it could have been just it is kind of just an EP. It's just 4 songs. And then Adam wrote the music, of course, and stuff like that during the pandemic. But there's one bonus track, so you've got them doing August and Everything After on the B-side. It's a very long cut with the London Symphony Orchestra. So this EP could have just been 4 songs or a one-sided record or even 2 songs on each side, but I like that they pressed this and gave us a classic tune or a song that hadn't been released before on the B-side. Really nice thick vinyl. It's not an Indie Store exclusive or anything fancy like that, but it's just great to hear some of these classic artists popping out some new releases. Definitely worth checking out. That's the other thing too, where it really sounds great, is hearing them perform with the London Symphony Orchestra. You definitely have great mastering and great vinyl to hear that with. And then actually, so on the EP side, my favorite song was the end where it popped off with Bobby and the Rat Kings, with Adam Duritz doing more piano and stuff like that. He's not playing piano as much on all of the tracks, but of course, if you're familiar with Counting Crows, me and Mr. Jones, and of course, It's Been a Long December, all those old 90s classics. So they're still going and brought out a new EP for us. Now, another band that did a completely different type of pandemic album is Monster Magnet. You gotta check out this artwork though. This is a better dystopia. Let's check out the outside first with all the dinosaurs and monsters and crazy psychedelic. It's a very acid, psychedelic driven album. And what's really cool though is I didn't realize this at first when I heard about it. It's an album of covers. So they actually did, it's a double LP, but let's show off what they did on the last side, because it doesn't fill up all the music on both sides of both records. So you get an etching of this like kind of psychedelic bullhorns thing, if you can see that on the camera there. So there's an etching on the D side, which is really cool. But these guys, oh, I forgot. I was going to bring out some records that they did covers of, but we'll just talk about it. So they're doing covers from Hawkwind, so one of my favorite kind of space rock, psychedelic bands. They're doing covers from this obscure stuff, too, from the band called Dust, a band called Morgan. So it's kind of like underground acid rocks, mostly 60s and 70s. There's a couple more modern bands, too, that they're covering. It's a cool set list, though. One of my favorite things, though, was the way it opens. One thing I really do wish it had was who was the authors or the players of the original songs. Because this first one, I'm going to forget, The Diamond Mine, is actually him kind of doing this crazy hype up. You know, he's talking all sped up and crazy about, you know, the music you're about to discover or whatever. And it sounds like Dennis Hopper, the crazy actor, you know, screaming and talking, or Wolfman Jack, but it was some old radio DJ who highlighted a lot of, like, you know, psychedelic and stoner rock music back in the day. So he's kind of doing paying homage to him, kind of imitating him like you're getting ready for a set list, like you're listening to the radio. Monster Magnet, you probably remember Space Lord and some of their stuff. They're kind of more of a 90s band, but they really have that gritty, sleazy, old school rock and roll attitude. But that was a cool pandemic release for them. They've never done a covers album before. I'm sure they played plenty of covers live, but it's not just your usual. It's not like they're just doing like some Hendrix and Sabbath. They're giving you some deeper cuts. So I thought that was pretty interesting. My Bloody Valentine. This is funny because this is a reissue from something that isn't really that old, but classic shoegaze band, their 90s piece, of course. Loveless was one of the best shoegaze albums of all time, just drenched in sound and feedback and things like that. But I think one of the most interesting things to note on this reissue that it's fully analog cut. I think it came out in, like, I'm just gonna make this up, maybe 2013 is when it originally had come out. But this is a brand new reissue, and they did a really great job with this glossy jacket, things like that. But they didn't really get it distributed from a label. The other weird thing is that it took them 13 years, I think, to put this album out. Kevin Shields had been working on this album since the Loveless album, and people kept rumoring that it's gonna come out, Great sounding release, though. And we also do have a mixture of vocals by Belinda Butcher. So it's Kevin and Belinda both doing some of the vocals. If you hadn't heard this album, it's definitely worth checking out. But we're just going to show off kind of, besides the record being nice, thick vinyl, fully analog cut, it comes with this little insert of photos, and it's kind of like washed out artistic pictures of the studio, perhaps, which is kind of what they do to their music, because it's just full of reverb and tons of guitar and synthesizer effects. So you get these really cool, glossy, very artistic sets of photos and mixing boards, stuff like that. But this is just called MBV, My Bloody Valentine. Great British alternative shoegaze band. They only did a few albums, though, and that was, you know, very it. Even though they're kind of heralded as one of the top shoegaze bands of all time, their releases took a long time. Kevin Shields, the writer and guitarist of the band, he just messed around in the studio, just perfecting his sound, perfecting his songs. It took a long time to create all of their albums, the few that they have. So instead of anything new, which I didn't even know this was getting reissued, it's finally available through stores. I do remember when it came out, it was really strange because I don't know if they had lost rights or royalty or distribution deal, but it was only available through the band, through Europe, through the website. So you had to pay in pounds and ship it and things like that. I remember it was a little frustrating. So finally it's available in stores, and they did a really great job, and it's full, nice thick jacket, analog cut. Check out the vinyl too while we're at it, I guess. They put it in a nice, not only is it an anti-static poly inner sleeve, but it's printed with that purplish artwork from the cover. Really nice piece of thick wax. Sounds great, would expect nothing less from them. And then I'm just gonna drop just to mention that, you know, the newer hip hop artist NF has a new mixtape out. This is the Clouds mixtape. Super fast rapper, he's a Michigan guy. Just kind of mentioning that's out there too, because we do have all types of music, new and used vinyl, in the store, so if you can stop it and check it out. We are huge fans of all types of music, and we've really been featuring and building up our like psychedelic, jazz, and blues section right now. But we have all sorts of great indie releases, lots of classics, Plus, we feature lots of local artist items and our, a lot of local vendors, a lot of great gifts and items in our store. So some of that stuff is in our boutique section on our website. You can check out our Culture Shock t-shirts there too. But all these new releases, you can choose to ship them or in-store pickup if you hit up our website at the link below at cultureshockshop.com. And we're going to be having some record holders up on our site too, locally made. So check those out, and every week we'll bring in some new releases and kind of show them off. This is the tip of the iceberg. There's tons of other new releases out this week. So check them out in our staff picks for new releases. Cheers.